and people who couldn't be here will be able to see it. So right now we're going to be talking about secondary data analysis. So that will be thinking about finding data maybe that you created, a colleague created, or maybe looking at a really large collection of data that already exists and doing secondary analysis on that data as an approach to doing research. So why do secondary data analysis? The benefits are the same in normal times as they are in current times. One of the big ones is that it removes, one of the big ones that's important right now at least, is that it removes any uncertainty for completion of a project because that data already exists and you have access. So no matter if COVID, if the processes and procedures we have to follow change in the middle of the year, if you end up leaving Prince George and going back to where your home community is in the middle of the year, none of these things will affect your ability to complete your research because the data has already been collected. In general, the data already being collected is a huge way to save on time and funding, especially when we start looking at the licensed data collections we have. You don't have to do survey design. You don't have to figure out how to find a representative sample of your group. That work has already been done for you. It also adds value to research that's already been completed, which is a really great way to continue the scholarly conversation. You might find data that someone else has used, and you might see another question you can answer with that data. So it's enriching all of those scholarly conversations that happen by looking at data someone else has collected and finding a new way to use it. So where can we get data like this? There are a lot of places you can get it. You and your colleagues, if you have data that you've already used in a project and you think maybe there's another question you can answer, you can go back to your own data. Or perhaps you have a colleague that has some data that you would like to examine from another angle. There are research data repositories. There's a wide variety of them. I'll be talking about a few today. They're typically discoverable on the open web, and they're either discipline-specific, institution-specific, research group-specific, or sort of discipline-agnostic and hold everything. There are also some really great licensed data collections available to you through the library that I'm going to show you. And we do also have a research data center on campus. Lorene Sluggett, who's the data, and now I can't remember her job title. She works in the RDC, and she wasn't able to come today to present on research center access, but there will be an upcoming workshop covering that, and that's access to actual microdata files from Statistics Canada. So that is another option that I'm not touching on today, but I wanted to make sure that you know it exists. So when we're talking about research data repositories, these are repositories where researchers take the data that they've collected and they deposit it. Sometimes people do this to satisfy publication requirements or grant requirements. Sometimes they do it just because they really believe in open science and open data. That's why I want people to be sharing their data. And sometimes it's because they really think that there will be value to other people using the data. So some big ones that you may or may not have heard of are Dataverses. Dataverse is a software that was developed by Harvard, and so a lot of data repositories use Dataverse. There are a couple of big non-profit, open to everyone repositories called Zenodo and Data Dryad. And then in your own specific disciplines, you will be more familiar if there are any repositories. A lot of the social sciences and physical sciences actually have discipline-specific repositories that are very popular and widely used by researchers in those fields. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just pop over and show you what some of these research data repositories look like and how we can identify a good data set within these repositories. So the first repository I'd like to show you is Scholars Portal Dataverse. And this is a platform that hosts a significant number of research data repositories for institutions across Canada. UNBC has recently joined. We're now a member of Scholars Portal Dataverse. You can see our little UNBC logo up here, which means that if you have data that you would like to deposit or that you're required to deposit, you are now able to do that through Scholars Portal. It also means that you can search for data sets from across institutions and research groups affiliated with post-secondary institutions across Canada. So I'm just going to do a quick search for mental health. So you can see that there are quite a few results, but we can see the keyword search isn't super great because it doesn't necessarily have both words. The searching in this is less than ideal, I will say. But once you start getting a sense of the kind of research you're after and the researchers that you know are doing the research that creates the data that you're interested in, you can look very specifically by researcher names, by the organization category, when the data was published. An important thing to consider is that this data is created by researchers and then shared. And sometimes this data comes beautifully packaged and tidy, and sometimes it doesn't. So I've chosen this study just to show you that what you want to look for in a data set to know that it's something that you could use. So the most important thing to look for in a data repository is a README file. If a data set doesn't come with a README file, you're going to get a pile of data and no map to understand what's happening. So that's the first thing you always want to check. And then here we can see that we have the final coded data, we have the survey, and we have a text file. So this should be enough if this is a topic that we're interested in. We know this data set is probably something that we can open up and we can figure out what's happening without having to go through that extra work. The more controlled access is to a repository, the more likely you are to find good data. So through Scholars Portal, there are local administrators for these dataverses at each institution, and institutions have policies regarding what data can be shared and what state it has to be in. So the data you get from this type of repository is likely to be closer to ready to use for you. Two more open repositories for data are Zenodo and Data Dryad, which you may have heard of. They are both discipline agnostic, much like Scholars Portal was, so any discipline can add data to these, and anyone can add data to these repositories. And that's where you might find some interesting data, but it might require some extra work to get it cleaned up and in a usable format. Switch back to my slides. So overall, when we're looking at these public and research data repositories, their pros are that they have data from almost all disciplines. So no matter what discipline you're coming from, you'll probably be able to find something that's related to work you're interested in. They're easy to access, and then again, they also support this idea of open science and encourages the sharing of data, which is so important to move beyond this idea of siloing our data and not letting other people potentially make great discoveries from the work that's already been done. Some cons are often people will deposit the minimum required by the publication or grant, which will be a replication data set. So not the entire data set, just the data set you need to replicate the analysis they did in their publication. The documentation and metadata are sometimes very lacking, and that's why it's important to look for those README files that I described earlier. And the data may need substantial cleaning. I think we've all been guilty of making decisions about organizing our data and files in a way that works very well for us in that present moment, but then potentially doesn't lend itself to someone else looking at that data, or even yourself looking at that data 2 or 3 years in the future. And sometimes data sets like that are cleaned up before they're shared, and sometimes they aren't. So when you're going into these research data repositories, it's really a wild range of sort of tidiness and readiness for analysis. We also subscribe to some licensed data collections here at UNBC. The 2 big ones that I want to cover today are the Statistics Canada Public Use Microdata File Collection and ICPSR, which is the Inter-University Consortium for Political and Social Research. So we have 2 sets of really great data, one from Canada, from Statistics Canada, and then ICPSR is international, but it features significantly more American data than anything else. The Statistics Canada licensed data, the really great stuff to use for secondary analysis, is the Public Use Microdata File Collection. And these are files that are created from the survey master files, and they've been manipulated in a way to eliminate any disclosure risk. So no matter what analysis you do to that file, there's no way that a participant from the original survey could be identified. This is done by grouping variables. So you might answer a survey with your exact age, but it'll be reported in this file in a 5-year group. They eliminate outliers, and sometimes some variables are suppressed entirely. So these files are great as the processed version of the file will allow you to answer your question. If it won't, you'll want to go to the Research Data Center, and access to that will be opening up this fall. Another great thing about the Statistics Canada files is that you can download them for analysis wherever you are. You don't have to be on campus. You just have to log in with your UNBC credentials, and you'll be able to download these files. You can download them for basically any statistical package you're interested in. They come with, I can't say full perfect documentation, especially not the older stuff, but they come with sufficient documentation to make sense of them, and it's also fairly easy to reach out to Statistics Canada for clarification if you have any questions about the data or the documentation that comes with it. The other big collection that I mentioned is ICPSR. So this collection has more than 14,000 studies. It's an international collection, but most of the data is US focused. So it has a lot of the analogous government surveys to the Statistics Canada surveys. So this is where you can get census data, other national level surveys, as well as surveys by researchers and other organizations. Because the collection's so massive, it's also good to know that their website is truly designed to hold your hand through the discovery process. There's really great searching. They have thematic sub-collections that are really great to browse, and you can also look up data sets by publication. So if there's a publication that you think has a data set you're very interested in, you can go back and search for that. I will say for these 2 collections, the main focus for them is social science research, but there is quite a vast array of stuff available to you. So I'll do the pros and cons, and then I'll show you what some interfaces look like for accessing this data, and then we'll have some time for question and answers at the end. So for the licensed data collections, the pros are that the data is close to ready to use. It has been collected and shared, and we pay for it, and because we pay for it, money goes into making it ready for you to use. Because it comes from a large-scale project and a large sample size, that's far beyond the scope of something that especially graduate students, but even some researchers could necessarily afford, and not on a super quick timeline. They are typically available to use with any software package. Some of the cons are that there's much more variety in American data than Canadian data, and they all have more permissive access to different types of data sets. So in Canada, any longitudinal data sets we don't have available publicly, so any data set that traces the same people through time, those are available in the RDC. There are some longitudinal data sets available through ICPSR. This is because of different rules regarding how we deal with data, what can be shared, and also just in the States, you have larger sample sizes, and so you can release more interesting data without the risk of identifying people in the same way. Another con is that not all government surveys are released in this way, so there might be a survey you're really interested in using, and it just might not be available through these collections. So for Canadian data, I'm going to show you, there are, if you're familiar with the Statistics Canada data at all, you'll know there are a variety of ways to access the data sets and download them. I'm going to show you Odyssey because it's the most user-friendly way to search and also the most user-friendly way to browse this data collection. It also includes some extra collections that I haven't highlighted today but are available. For example, there's a large collection of public opinion polls of Canadians that are available through Odyssey. We can also search, just by keyword, but also Odyssey allows us to search to the variable level. So if there's a specific variable you're interested in looking for, you can find all of the surveys and data sets that contain that variable. To be timely, I'm going to search for COVID in this data collection. And we can see that it's Canadian, so we will get French and English results. But you can see that we've already actually got some public use files from Statistics Canada regarding COVID. Each of these survey records will give you an abstract of the survey, the description. It will give you the documentation. So here we have the user's guide. So that's what you need to know to do your analysis, the code book, so all of the variables and what they mean, and also the questionnaire. You can also see the survey variables. Here, this isn't the nicest way to look at them, but we can see we're going to get age groups in increments of 10. We're going to get information about precautions they took. But what we'll really want to be doing if we're doing our own secondary analysis is go to Explore Download. If you're off campus at this point, you'll have to authenticate. But here, we're going to get the same information. We have all the information that was available in that record. We also can see the variables here. And we can download this file because this is old software. The download icon is this tiny little floppy disk. When we download, we see we can pick SPSS, Stata, SAS, comma separated if you're using R. So any format that you need this data in, it's available to you. And then you can just download the data. Another way to look at data in Odyssey, which is actually what I prefer, especially if you're not really sure what you're looking for, is right from the top of this page, you can browse. And this will show us all of the data organized thematically. So here you can see all of the themes we have as far as data, and we even have a COVID-19 section which shows us the 4 files from Statistics Canada from rapid surveys they've put out since March, including this brand new one that's about parenting during the pandemic. ICPSR is, again, available through the library webpage. With ICPSR, to access the data, you do first have to create an account when you're authenticated on campus. So you either have to physically be here or use the VPN network to log in and then access it. And you just create an account using your UNBC email, and then it will know that you're a user on our campus and that you are allowed to have this data. You only have to do that the first time you create your account. Once you've created an authenticated account, you can access this data again from anywhere. Here's where we see that the University of Michigan has a lot of money and a lot of time to put into making this a really useful collection. So here we can see, we can look at topics, series, or thematic data collections. We can start by searching right away. This most downloaded is kind of interesting if you're just wondering sort of like what's a good data set. What's a data set that gets a lot of reuse? Typically they're health data sets. And you can search the whole collection, but I would recommend, if you're interested in finding data for reuse, that starting to look at the thematic collections can make it a bit less daunting because you'll only be at that subset of the wider collection. I'll just search COVID again, so you can see what the search results look like here. So much like any library database, we have options on this side for faceting our search. We have the studies available here. We also can see if there are any data-related publications. So here, if we take a look at this survey, you'll get very similar information that we got from Odyssey. We will get the description, the scope. We will get a codebook and the data set, and then here we can download this project. It will ask you to log in, which I should be able to do for you right now. I apologize. I apparently don't remember my password, and I can't log in to show you that. I apologize. But it will let you download that data set, again, in all of the formats available. So that's the end of what I had. The idea was really just to give a brief overview of the idea of secondary data analysis and to show the breadth and the depth of the data that is available. We have plenty of time for questions, and we have a fairly small group right now. So if anyone has any specific questions, I'm going to stop recording, and then if you want to unmute yourself or hop in the chat, I will do my best to answer anything you have